and they're going to talk to us about how PTC has developed in America and also make some comparisons with the European train control system and the European traffic management system. So, Joe, you want to go first?
Carl, thank you. Oh, ow. That'll wake you up. Well, thanks so much for sticking around. I know some of you are here just for the drawing, so I'm going to try to be as brief as I possibly can. They gave me, of course, the easiest and most and least controversial subject to speak about today to end up the conference, which is positive train control. We do have some good news for you, though, which is that there has been a similarly difficult time getting this stuff done in the UK. We're going to tell you a little bit about that story. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of introduce you a little bit to Network Rail. A lot of you probably know Network Rail as the national owner-operator of the UK rail system. It's kind of unique in that there's a single company that owns, operates, maintains the entire infrastructure, owns 2,500 stations. I think I have some statistics, so let me just move forward. We are Europe's #1 railroad at this point, according to the European Commission. We're the safest, we're the fastest growing, and we are the most improved railway, which I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I remember getting a most improved trophy when I played football, and it wasn't really something to be proud of, I don't think, because I was terrible, and I was a little less terrible the next year. So our operations in the UK are pretty impressive. We carry over 4 million passengers per day. 20,000 train movements are managed by our train dispatchers, and we do incident response across the entire network in addition to maintaining it and improving it. You can see the miles of track, signals. The interesting thing for me, and I'm fairly new to the company, but one of the things that really kind of caught my eye was in the transition from Railtrack. If you know the story of Railtrack, which was kind of an abortive attempt in the UK to have a private company own and maintain the infrastructure, which wound up turning out not so good and actually led to the creation of Network Rail. We've been able to achieve a 40% reduction in the cost of running the railroad over the last 10 years, which is pretty darn impressive. We also own 2,500 stations across the country, and we operate the 18 largest and most iconic, especially those in the big cities. I'm not going to do death by PowerPoint and read this entire thing to you, but basically we are the consulting arm of Network Rail. So at some point back in 2012, the powers that be at Network Rail decided that we were getting pretty good at this whole railroading thing, and maybe we should try to take some of this expertise around the world. So there was an international consulting arm created, and it's about 50% British, 50% foreigners, quote unquote, Americans and Canadians, who work for this organization now. So why did the UK move beyond simple train control? We know the story in the United States with Chatsworth. A red signal violation in the UK is called a SPAD. Just like many other things in England, there's a very kind of pithy, kind of cute title for it. It's called a SPAD. And SPAD is a bad thing. It's a signal passed at danger. And SPADs have been the cause of several major rail accidents in the UK. But interestingly, SPADs were not the principal reason why positive train control was brought to the fore in the UK or across Europe. There are a variety of train protection systems that have been in use in the UK, which are roughly analogous to automatic train control systems that we've had here in the United States. Automatic train stop type systems, transponder based, the train protection warning system that you see here, ATP, and then finally the stage that the UK is at, and most of Europe is at now, is rolling out the deployment of what's called the European Train Control System, ETCS. So here's the reason. Those two light blue lines are growth in passenger journeys and passenger miles. And you can see roughly around 1995, demand in the UK for rail service, just skyrocketed. But the one thing that you notice about that is the dark blue line is the length of our network stayed roughly the same. So we're carrying many more passengers on the same network. And so that's increased pressure to increase capacity. There's also a question of interoperability. Of course, with the coming of the European Union, the European Commission, there's been a push to kind of standardize things across Europe. It's not any surprise that interoperability is an issue across Europe, as there are a number of different train control systems. The Thales, which you see here, actually requires 7 completely separate train control systems on board the train because of all the territory that it crosses. So at some point the European Commission came forward and said we need to do something about this, similar to similar to the problem that we're creating for ourselves here in the United States with interoperability. The Europeans kind of looked at it and said we need to do something about this. So those were the reasons. So interestingly, the Chatsworth incident here, the red signal incident at Chatsworth, resulted in those deaths with the head-on collision of a freight train and a commuter train, was kind of the impetus to push positive train control to the fore. It's the reason for the congressional mandate. In Europe, interestingly, it's interoperability and provision of capacity. The other thing is that Europe has been trying to develop, for some time now, the European Commission has been trying to develop this trans-European network so that there is seamless rail journeys across the entire continent, including, not only on the continent, but also in the UK and Ireland. And you can't really do that unless your trains can interoperate very well with train control systems and communication systems. So at this point, I hope I kept that really, really brief because I wanted to leave the meat of this for Tony so he can tell you a little bit about ERTMS, which is the kind of the European flavor of positive train control. And the thing I think you're going to get out of this, or I hope you get out of this, is that the same challenges that we face here in the United States and the same kind of growing pains we've had with positive train control here have been experienced in the UK in a very similar fashion. They're facing the same challenges, despite the fact that it's a single owner, operator, infrastructure owner, maintainer, as opposed to the United States where we have this kind of hodgepodge of Class 1 railroads, transit authorities, and passenger rail operations. It's been similarly challenging, and Tony's going to talk a little bit about the specifics of that system and then do a little bit of a case study of the deployment of ERTMS on the Cambrian lines in Wales. So, Tony?